The podcast you're about to hear involves true stories, which may contain graphic content that is not suitable for children. Listener's discretion is advised. This is Esoteric Oddities.
Hey guys!
We got Kiko here today. Y'all remember her?
What's up?
Y'all remember her at Kiko L, at Nooks and Crannies, at the Afro Witch.
Follow her
At it all.
to the
Back at it
ends
again.
of the earth. Back at it again. And she's joining us today on in a hello.
In it.
We're off to a really good start.
We are.
In a 2-part episode.
Got a 2-parter today.
And it was actually suggested by Amy. So thank you, Amy, for suggesting this topic.
Thank you.
We are going to be discussing the royal family. Not just the royal family, but conspiracy theories surrounding said family.
Spooky.
I'm not gonna lie, my shit's pretty lengthy, so we're just gonna cut right fucking
Y'all
to
don't get
it.
the banter today.
I'm sure you will, though. I'm sure you will.
It's coming. Trust.
I got a lot of my information from, I could count it, I think I have 12 sources.
We love that
But
We love being thorough.
yeah, but as always, our shit is always going to be listed in the show notes. But before I get into it, if y'all could head on over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating and a review, that would be great.
Review us. Tell us we
Give 'em
suck.
that
Tell us
5
you love us.
stars.
I don't know.
But don't tell us
how
we
you
suck.
feel.
Just give us 5 stars. You can make it short, leave an emoji. I don't care. It just helps us out on the back end of pushing us up in the charts.
I wonder if Najee ever reviewed us on. Here we are.
And here we are. Okay, so let's just jump into it. I'm going to give a quote unquote brief history of her because I think her history is important. And then I will get into the conspiracies of what happened. And this is the story of Princess Diana.
Oh my God, Princess Di.
So Diana Frances Spencer was born on July 1st, 1961 in Norfolk. The Spencer family was among the most prominent of the British nobility. Her grandmother was actually the lady-in-waiting for the Queen. I didn't know what the frick that was, so I had to look it up. Essentially, it's like you have to be a noble person to... You have to be in high society, towards the royals. You have to be a noble person to be the lady-in-waiting, which is essentially an assistant to the Queen. What are they waiting for? The world may never know. So that was Diana's grandmother, was the Queen's assistant at one point. So the Spencer family had been closely allied with the British royal family for several generations before her time. When she was 7 years old, Diana's parents divorced. She lived with her mother in London during her parents' separation in 1967, but at that year's Christmas holiday, her father refused to allow Diana to go back to London with her mother, and he ultimately won custody of Diana. She then became known as Lady Diana at age 14 after her father inherited the title of Earl Spencer in 1975. These titles really confuse me.
Right. I'm like, huh?
What does that mean? What can you do?
Right.
Can I be a part of it? Do I have to be invited? What's good with it? So then in 1976, her father married Reine, Countess of Dartmouth. Dartmouth. Thank you,
You're
Kiko.
welcome.
And Diana's relationship with her stepmother was not great. She resented Reine, called her a bully, and later described her childhood as, quote, very unhappy and very unstable, the whole thing, end quote.
Cinderella.
Right. So in November 1977, Diana's oldest sister, Sarah,
Looking at you.
S-A-R-A-H,
Okay, not me.
Oh, just kidding.
she brought around her boyfriend, Charles, Prince of Wales. And Sarah was like, Diana, look at my boyfriend. He's a prince. Isn't he cute?
Oh.
And she was like, okay. So at the same time, I was really surprised by this, but at the same time, Diana took on a series of low-paying jobs. She worked as a dance instructor for children, but I think she ended up getting in a skiing accident or something, and she couldn't do that anymore. I don't know.
I do remember that.
And then she became a preschool teacher. What's good with that? And then during the summer of 1980, Diana, who was now 19 years old, watched her sister's boyfriend, Prince Charles, play polo, and Prince Charles, who was 13 years older than her, took a serious interest in Lady Diana as a potential bride. What a motherfucking piece of scum.
Literally.
I probably shouldn't say that.
Why?
I'm gonna say it anyway, but like, how are you gonna be like with his sis or with Diana's sister, and then be like, I kind of like your little sister?
Right,
That's what
weird.
the little bit there side of the polo game.
Ooh, okay, so
Also, wasn't like the royal family like, known for that?
Oh,
Passing
cheating?
people like
Oh,
along?
absolutely. Yeah. That's like the way back. Like if you look in the history of all the princes
I
and
looked
shit.
in the history because I
Oh
have
yeah,
it.
I know you did. So they like that's what they did. They just like cheated.
Pass people
Pass
around.
along, yeah.
To be
Boppity
like,
bop.
hi, I don't want you to be a queen. I want you to be a queen. So you can't be with him because he has to be with her in order for you to be there.
Sabotage.
Ooh, I followed that. Sabotagery. I don't know where I was going with that. So
We
after
don't need no hateration.
I'm saying
In this dance agree.
after breaking up with Sarah, he invited Diana on the royal yacht Britannia. Is that what it?
Britannia.
Yeah, Britannia, sure. For the
on
weekend. Yeah, I know you're just
Ton.
autocorrect.
correct.
Autocorrect. You said it confidently, so I'm believing you. I'm buying it. Shortly after that, Prince Charles introduced her to his royal family, and Lady Diana was received well by the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, who is the Queen's husband. I was confused because I thought it was the King and the Queen, but it doesn't work that way.
No.
No,
It
okay.
seems like queens are more important.
Well, yeah, but also the Queen has the bloodline, and he married into it, so he doesn't have the bloodline. It would be their child, and that comes into play with Diana a little bit later of like what
So
why
when you
that's
marry
important.
in and you're a guy, you're a duke and not a king.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because then it would be like Prince William now. He would become king. Like the king and the queen, as my knowledge, at least in this, the royal bloodline, the king and the queen aren't married. It's usually a queen and then a duke, or like a king and a princess, or a duchess. That could be wrong. odditiespodcast@gmail.com if you want to tear me a new one. Please do.
I'd be interested.
I'm lonely. Tear me a new one. So on February 6th, 1981, Prince Charles proposed, and Diana looked at the fucking 14 solitaire diamonds surrounding a 12-carat oval blue sapphire set in 18-carat white gold. She said, hell yes, motherfucker, I'll fucking do it.
Right.
No
But
hesitation.
right, I wouldn't hesitate either. I'd be like, you're a prince and me? What? But they did keep their engagement a secret for several weeks. Now, this is where one of the first of many scandals with Diana began. But it wasn't even like that scandalous here. Okay, anyway. So Prince Charles did not propose in like the traditional romantic way you would think. He actually had like a selection of rings that he showed to her and then kind of let her choose one. And at the time, Diana's choice caused a lot of talk in town, I guess. And some people criticized her for choosing a ring instead of having one passed down, or at the very least having a custom one made. And I'm not really sure how that's Diana's fault because it was Prince Charles who was just like,
He offered.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I
anyway.
feel like the right thing to do. Like, let me choose if I have to wear it.
Right. But also, like, I get it. The royal, I think the biggest thing was that it wasn't passed down.
Yeah.
But it became like,
I heard that.
I think this was one of the things where some of the people were just like, oh, this girl's different.
Yeah.
Like, even though it's like a small thing, as small as a ring,
Who's
it's
this bitch?
tradition.
She, like-
right.
She broke a lot of rules.
She broke a lot of rules.
And bones while skiing.
And bones while skiing.
Yes.
And a side note, this is the same engagement ring that Prince William placed on Kate Middleton's finger.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. That's sketchy.
So, wait, why? It's passed down.
Oh, right.
That's cute.
She said, that's
That's
sketchy.
sketchy. How to get that
Right.
one?
Literally, I'm like, how did he get out of her finger?
Can you imagine if like everybody was like, but wait, I thought
How
she
did
was
you get
buried
that?
with it.
Oh, wait. It's like that one part in Britney Spears' song. It's like,
I thought the old lady dropped it in the ocean in the end.
hey!
Well, I dug up the grave and got it for you. This is disrespect.
It is. But like,
Okay,
this
let's-
is why people come here.
Okay, let's bring it back. No disrespect. Please don't kill us. So, regardless, Diana moved into the Buckingham Palace, and the 21-year-old Diana became the Princess of Wales at their wedding on July 29th, 1981. I've been so bloated, I have felt like the fucking Princess of Wales.
I really feel that.
No.
We went mini golfing, and the only soundtrack they were playing was fucking whale calls.
Wait, what?
It was literally like,
Sperm whale mating call.
can I play it?
No, don't play it. Everybody knows what the fucking whales sound like.
I just,
So anyway, during their ceremony, she did not say that she would, quote unquote, obey him. And that was a traditional vow that her and Charles decided to leave out of the wedding at the couple's request, naturally, which again caused some scandal among the spectators. But let's give them something to talk about. Lady Diana was the first English woman to marry the first in line to the throne in over 300 years. And she was also the first royal bride to ever have a common folk paying job before her engagement. Right, us common folk. Okay, so the wedding was obviously described as a fairy tale wedding and was globally televised to 750 million people. That's almost a billion.
What?
That's almost 1/7 of the world's population. Okay, and people were doing comparisons to the other royal weddings that have happened recently to...
Yeah, I was going to say, how much did...
It's really hard to tell because nobody televises shit anymore. So it was a lot lower. It was like 24 million. But they didn't take into consideration the videos people rewatched and the videos that people streamed on Twitter.
I also feel like they deleted a lot of stuff. I remember like 2 years ago, I found like all these articles stating why like they thought that the Queen Elizabeth was a reptilian, and I couldn't find any this time. Like, I swear they deleted it all. And then what was really sketchy was this one, the only one that was left. I tried to click on it, and it was like, page not found.
Oh, 404, bitch. Where?
Right.
Exactly. They 404'd me.
Oh, no. In our last...
Redirect your search.
Right? Ask Jeeves.
Right.
After she became Princess of Wales, Diana automatically acquired rank as the third highest female in the United Kingdom order of precedence at the time and became the most famous and the most photographed woman in the world.
Wow.
How crazy.
her.
Everybody loved her. So on November 5th, and also keep all of this in mind once we get to the conspiracy theories, because this is kind of how different she was. So just keep that in mind. On November 5th, 1981, Prince Charles and Diana's first pregnancy was officially announced. But in January of 1982, just 12 weeks into the pregnancy, Diana fell down a staircase in their estate. So she was 12 weeks pregnant. She fell down the stairs. So the doctor was summoned from London, which was about 2.5 hours away from the estate. And the doctor found that although Diana had suffered severe bruising, the fetus was luckily uninjured. So then in February of 1982, photographs of Diana pregnant in a bikini while on vacation were published in the media. Once again, this was a huge no-no. This was a massive scandal, and her mother-in-law, Queen Elizabeth, released a statement and called it, quote, the blackest day in history of British journalism, end quote. She was like mourning this.
Oh my God. Ma'am.
Let her...
I wouldn't call it that.
Right.
Queen Elizabeth, listen, Lizzie. You're just mad that Diana's pussy's popping severely and yours don't. I probably shouldn't say that. I'm going to have to edit that out. I'm not trying to get assassinated here. So on June 21st, 1982, Diana gave birth to their first son, Prince William. 2 years later, Prince Harry was born. I also just found out his name isn't Harry. His name is Henry. And Harry is like his nickname.
How? I have this one friend. Everyone calls him Jake, but his name is Jack.
Wait, but Jack is usually a nickname for John.
His name is John.
What?
Isn't that weird?
So his name is John, but it's also Jack, but it's also Jake. That sounds like a me problem,
right.
like a
It's a
multiple
lot.
personality.
I don't know. He'll have to explain to you.
Oh my
I think
Lord.
his name is actually John, but everyone calls him Jake.
Well, yeah, because
Also-
that's what JFK, John F. Kennedy, didn't go by John. He went by Jack.
Also, where do you get John from Jack from Jake? Like, what is that?
They're all three separate names.
They are, yeah. Let's leave it at that. Like, are you a John? Are you a Jack? Are you a Jake? After Harry was born on September 15th, 1984, Diana once again broke the traditional rules and gave her sons a more loose and liberal childhood than was usual for the royal children. I remember reading that I think it was Prince William that right after she had the first kid, they went out of the country or something, and everybody was like, wait, that's a whole like new ass baby. Why are you out the kingdom? And it was like a whole big thing, and she's like, damn, like, why is everybody so concerned about what I'm doing with my child?
Or with my life.
Right. So she herself, rather than her husband, chose their first names. She did not use a royal family nanny. She instead hired one herself. She picked out their school clothes, their schools that they attended. She planned their outings, and she actually took them to school as often as she could.
I love that.
She would fucking get in her car, off her high horse, into her car, and been like, "Get in, losers. We're going to kindergarten."
That's so amazing.
I
Yes,
know.
girl.
She was
Be
a Cancer.
normal. We love that for her.
So Diana was then involved in a shit ton of charities, and I think this is why like a lot of people really, really liked her. Besides the fact that she was like a people person, they called her the People's Queen, or the People's Princess, rather. Sorry,
She was very down to earth.
she was. I think she like knew what was up, but she also was. She did a lot of fucking charities, and she was connecting to people on a personal level, which Britain didn't like. In Britain, like it hadn't really been seen from somebody royal, because not that they were stuck up, but most of them were stuck up, but they were also very, very secretive. So it was like you don't really know what goes on behind closed doors, which obviously in any situation you don't, but they just like wouldn't go out and talk to people in the street, where Diana would go out and literally she would like, they said in one documentary, she would find a person who looked like they were like not weak, but they looked like timid or like nervous in a group of people, not necessarily people reaching out, but she would go to them and she would like grab their hand and talk. And like in the document, you can see her do like walking to her fucking car, just being like, "Hi babe, how are you? What's going on? My name's Diana." That I sounded just like her.
Oh my god!
I love that for you. Yeah.
Where she had an Aquarius moon like me.
I knew it. I knew it. When you were looking it up, and I was like, "What's her moon?" I was like, "Watch it be Aquarius."
You should have said it. Also, do you watch The Crown?
No.
So I started watching it a little bit, and I know whoever's listening to this, somebody out there has watched The Crown, and my mom swears by it that like you kind of learn why the queen is the way she is by watching this. However, I don't know how much about The
Queen
Crown.
is still with us.
Right.
Okay.
So Diana worked heavily in charities at the height of the HIV and AIDS epidemic, where there was so much fucking panic and like misinformation about how the virus is contracted. Because remember, this is the 1980s. This is like when it was happening and everybody was horrified of it, and it was scary for a lot of fucking people. But even though there was so much fear and stigma surrounding it, on April 19th of 1987, Princess Diana, when I think she was 26 at this time, she was like sometime in her 20s, she attended the opening of the first ward in the UK that was dedicated specifically for treating HIV and AIDS, and she removed her royal gloves and shook the hands of people with AIDS. So naturally pictures of this were taken, and it was again a huge scandal that shook the country because so much misinformation. Again, like people didn't know exactly how it was contracted, and then when people started
commoners.
And then not only that, but it was somebody who
Like, she's
and
gonna get AIDS.
that's what people were saying.
I knew what you were trying to say. I was the bad guy. I just came out and said it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So she stated, quote, "HIV does not make people dangerous to know. You can shake their hands and give them a hug. Heaven knows they need it. What's more, you can share their homes, their workspaces, and their playgrounds and toys." End quote. So she was just like, y'all,
it'll be fun.
they're
Chill
human
the fuck
beings. Yeah. And again, this is amazing because it opened a lot of people's eyes because she was so idolized. So she used that as a soapbox for her to like educate people on this. And it was a sad time for a lot of people who were ostracized and treated like diseased animals. So she also stood up and humanized the gay community while she was doing this, which again in the 80s and even into the 90s was like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? She raised Prince Harry and William to never exclude anybody for their sexuality, and she told them to always learn more about topics and misunderstood concepts. So, as you can already tell, she was an activist, she was a humanitarian, she was a philanthropist, and a deserving gay icon. Yeah. If I do say so myself. She also stood up against the use of landmines, which I didn't know was like such a big deal, but Diana would go out to countries that had live like landmines, and she walked through the fucking fields with the people. Yeah. So essentially like what was going on was these landmines were detonating on innocent people and killing a shit ton of people, and the people it wasn't killing, they were like getting their body parts removed because like their leg would have been blown off, and then they have to learn to like fucking deal with that. So she was a huge advocate against the use of landmines because they were still legally being used, and then later they actually passed a law that said you can't use landmines anymore. And then The 90s came, and there was a shitload of royal secrets that were exposed. Ooh. So the Brits like their tea, so I hope you get it, because we're going to spill it. So after 5 years of marriage, Charles... Why did I say it like that? Charles and Diana's lack of chemistry and the age difference of almost 13 years took a strain on them. And you can actually, like, see it in interviews and photos of them. He was just, like... He was not.
She was like,
yeah, he was not nice to her. There was one interview where they were just like, so would you say you guys are in love? And Diana said, of course. And he goes, whatever love is. And she just
ew,
like,
sir,
how did you trap me here?
You have a literal catch, and this is how you're treating her,
right?
You literal swine.
I thought you were gonna say. I thought you were going to say crumb. I was ready for the crumb.
You literal crumb.
I should stuff you like a pig.
Okay, I should fucking eat you like a crumb.
So, while the two were still married, Charles reignited his relationship with his former girlfriend, Camilla Bowles, but her last name is spelled like bowels. So Diana herself wasn't exactly innocent. She, began an affair with Major James Hewitt, who was the family's former horseback riding instructor. And this all became public, and it did not look good to the royals. So the Queen and the Duke tried to get Charles and Diana back together. That didn't work. And during 1992 and 1993, leaked tapes of recorded telephone conversations made both Prince Charles and Princess Diana look really fucking bad. So audio recordings of Diana and the British actor James Gilby were made public in August of 1992 rather, not 1922. Who knows with all these reptilians.
Okay, you never know what you're gonna get.
Right, and there was transcripts that were published into the newspaper and magazines that same month. So another article in November 1992 leaked intimate exchanges between Prince Charles and Camilla. Y'all, I'm not going to get into it because it's
aren't you?
Because I have so much I need to cover, but look up.
Give me a taste.
Okay, Tampon Gate. Look up Tampon Gate if you want a little slice of what the fuck was going on in those leaked phone calls. Okay. Keyword being leaked. In December 1992, the couple's separation was announced. In a videotape recorded by her public speaking instructor in 1992, Diana admitted that in 1984 through 1986, she had been deeply in love with somebody in this work environment, end quote. That was a quote. They think she was referring to a bodyguard, but that bodyguard actually ended up being fired. It was all this speculation. Basically, Diana was having affairs and Prince Charles was also having affairs. So I'm just going to say...
They were living their lives, chilling.
Right. Diana also confessed that while pregnant with her first child, she intentionally threw herself down the stairs because she was feeling, quote, so inadequate, end quote. Remember when she fell down the stairs? Yeah, so she wasn't pushed. She leapt.
She pushed herself.
Yeah, so although she blamed Camilla for her marital problems, Diana began to believe her husband had probably been involved in other affairs. There was this interview that was done in 1994 that Prince Charles did, and he kind of just opened his mouth to saying that, yes, they had affairs, and he said that something like Diana had, there was a recorded 300 phone calls to other men. And he basically was like, yes, I had affairs, but she had affairs too. Not only that, but she had so many fucking affairs. And he said something like she would sneak off at night and use the phone box that was outside, like the phone booth. They call them phone boxes because they're cool like that. And she would make calls from there. And there was over 300 things that were recorded. And, it basically made everybody look really bad. And the royal family was like, hello, we're royal. Can we, like, if we're going to do this, let's
down.
Yes. Because also, if you think about it, I mean, Queen Elizabeth, yes, that was a big deal to have the media, but this was one of the first, like, huge relationships that the media was around for, like television and obviously newspapers and magazines, and all this scandal was going on, so something could happen, but it would be spread like that. Yeah. Whereas, like, in the Queen's time and, like, a little bit before she was crowned, it wasn't.
It was a minute.
Yeah, it was so easy to keep a secret, right? So in November of 1995, Diana actually opened up about her own depression and her rampant bulimia. She also talked about how she would self-harm herself. She would give herself bruises, and yeah, it's really dark. It's really fucked up. I watched a documentary on Netflix. I think it was called Diana in Her Own Words. I watched it last night, and it's essentially recordings of her, and then while she's talking about how shitty of a time she was having, they're showing video footage of how she was just, like, forced to smile at, times like this. And also her like pregnancies were really difficult, and she had morning sickness, and apparently nobody in the royal bloodline had morning sickness as bad as her. She just had a rough pregnancy that they were just like, keep it the fuck together, and she was forced to like walk in front of all these people, and it was a whole fucking thing.
No.
So
get me out of here.
then finally in 1995, the queen she sent letters to the prince and princess of Wales, and she was just like, hey, y'all should probably fucking get a divorce because it's all out in the fucking public. So Charles was like, okay, cool, let's do that. And then in February 1996, Diana was like, yeah, let's do that, but I'm going to make it a little negotiation. I'm not going to keep quiet, which is what the royals wanted. Diana instead issued her own announcement and the divorce agreement and the detailed terms, which is very private and something that you shouldn't do not that you shouldn't do, but something that they did not want her to do. And as you can tell, Buckingham Palace was like, are you sure you wanted to do that, honey? So remember, she was doing things like this.
Leave her alone. She literally is fucked up from y'all forcing her to do shit she don't want to do. And now y'all want to be mad that she's acting out on account of y'all.
Right, but I mean, like, they hadn't had situations like this before.
Right, so how do we handle her?
Right, so in July 1996, when the divorce was still happening, Diana publicly accused Prince Charles's personal assistant. Her name was Tiggy Leg Bjork, and she'll come back.
Tiggy Leg Bjork?
Yeah, I'm just going to call her Tiggy. Diana accused her of aborting Prince Charles' child. And though this was never proven, but Tiggy was just like, I want an apology. And Diana was like, fuck you, I'm not giving you an apology. But remember, because that Tiggy girl, she'll come back up. So the divorce was finalized in 1996, and she received a lump sum settlement of 17 million pounds, as well as an additional 400,000 pounds per year. So the couple signed a confidential agreement that prohibited them from further discussing the divorce or of their married life. But did she stick to that? Not quite. Diana lost her Royal Highness title, and she kept the title Diana, Princess of Wales. Because when they got married, she was Princess of Wales, but she had her Royal Highness, but they stripped her of that. And the only reason she had the Princess of Wales title was because she was the mother of the prince who would one day become the king. Also, after this divorce, she was offered royal security, but she was like, I don't want royal security. So she found her own like small security team. Basically, her butler became her like straight gay best friend. And he did a lot more than what a butler would do. But she did get like a security team, but she possibly could have
self-sufficient with my money, honey.
Could have benefited a little more from having a little more people behind her, but we'll get into that. Within a month, Diana began a relationship with Dodi Al-Fayed, who was an Egyptian socialite from London, and he was also the son of a billionaire, Mohammed Al-Fayed.
She said, take me to Browntown.
Right.
I mean...
In August 1997, the couple had spent 9 days together on board Fayed's family yacht on the French and Italian Riviera. And on Saturday, August 30th, Diana and Fayed were heading back to London, but decided to make a romantic stop first. So they were like, let's land in Paris on our private jet. And she was like, okay, baby, let's do that because we're rich and royal, and why not? Well, not really royal anymore, but like, yeah. So
literally, they snatched her title. They said, "Bitch, Diana."
Nope. They intended on
no disrespect, y'all, but like
I get
she was the best one, and they kicked her out. Like, why does the best ones always go?
Well, I mean, if they did get a divorce, she couldn't keep the title either.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. I mean, honestly, it seems like she had a really bad time, so she's probably relieved.
Right, and she said something along the lines of like, I don't need this title. Also, I can't get into it because we haven't got there in the timeline, but I'll come back to it. Put a pin in it. We'll be back. Okay. So they intended on just staying in Paris for the one night, and then they were going to go back to London that following day. Fayed's father, Mohammed, owned the Hotel Ritz Paris. So finding a place to stay was obviously easy. However, it's also kind of blatantly obvious because everybody there knows Mohammed, knows Fayed, knows Princess Diana, and know that if they're going to stay in Paris, that's where they're going to stay. So the paparazzi caught wind of this, and inevitably they showed up at this hotel. Also, just going to remind you how crazy the paparazzi were there. I knew they were crazy for Princess Diana, but when I say she became the most photographed woman in the world.
That's crazy.
she couldn't do anything without like swarms.
Yeah.
Like she would be
How
walking.
was she okay?
Probably
She wasn't. She opened up about, she was depressed. She was like self-harming. She had bulimia because small
do
comments
anything.
people would make it. She wasn't okay. So that's like part of the reason why she wanted to get the fuck out of Buckingham House, but she couldn't until
'cause
the
world
divorce
knew
was
she
Yeah.
right. So,
And she still has kids.
yeah, exactly. And
Connected.
but she did love her kids. She like loved her kids.
Yeah. She brought them to school in her fucking car.
So
Of
cute.
course.
So, Fayed's father also owned luxury apartments nearby. So they were like, why don't we go stay at the apartments nearby rather than the hotel, because it's going to be safer as long as nobody finds out, right? So it's not exactly clear whose idea this was, but it's assumed that it was Dodi Al-Fayed's. I'm just going to call him Fayed from now on. It was assumed it was his idea because his father had told him, why don't you just stay in the hotel? But Fayed Al-Fayed was like, I'm going to call the deputy head of security at the Ritz Hotel, who actually had his day off. And this guy's name is Henri Paul. So I'm going to call him Paul just to clarify. So Fayed asked Paul to come to the hotel and be their driver. So there was only one car available parked in the lower basement garage of the Ritz, and it was the soon to become infamous black 1994 Mercedes-Benz S280. So the plan was, Fayed was going to have his security guards walk through the front door of the hotel where there was a decoy car. So everybody in the paparazzi would be like, oh shit, there they are. And they would follow that car as it drove off, while Fayed, Diana, the driver, and one of his security guards would get in a car in the back alleyway, and then they would drive the opposite direction to the apartments where they were going to stay for the night. That was the plan. So Diana, Fayed, Paul, and one of Fayed's security guards, Trevor Reese Jones, then departed from the hotel's back entrance at 12:20 a.m. on August 31st. So this is like right after midnight. They were heading for the apartments. Now, although most of the paparazzi were in the front, there were a few in the back. A lot of people say that, yes, most of the people were in the front, but then and this is kind of important to note, they were like, well, the paparazzi in the back notified the paparazzi in the front that they were sneaking out the back and to follow them. But that's what everybody was saying. And they were like, that's why so many paparazzi were following them that night. However, that's their competition. So if the paparazzi are in the back, I'm like, I'm not telling anybody. I'm going to follow this car that nobody knows of. Photographs of Dodi Al-Fayed and Princess Diana kissing, one of them sold for, I want to say, I think $500,000 for one photograph. So
I ain't telling y'all shit.
right, but that's what a lot of
So
people.
that's fishy.
Yeah, and again, I'll get into it because a lot of people blamed paparazzi for what happened, but I don't know how many paparazzi actually knew of what was going on until after said situation happened. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So in the car, Diana sat in the back right seat behind the front passenger, and Fayed sat next to her in the back left seat. Now, their cars are how American cars are, so you don't have to think of it in the reverse.
Oh.
So she's in like the back right seat behind the passenger in the front, and she was sitting next to Dodi Al-Fayed. They're both in the back seat, and in the passenger seat was Trevor Reese Jones, and the driver was Henri Paul. Okay, so just that's where they're sitting because that becomes important too. After leaving the hotel, they drove along the embankment road parallel to a river I can't pronounce and into the Place de Lauma underpass, which is a tunnel. So 23 minutes after midnight, Henri Paul lost control of the vehicle at the entrance to the tunnel, speeding at 65 miles per hour. The car struck the right-hand wall and then swerved to the left of the two-laned road before it collided head-on with the 13th cement pillar that supported the tunnel's roof. The car spun and hit a stone wall of the tunnel backwards before coming to a stop. As the four lay in the car wreck, the paparazzi finally reached the scene and obviously were taking fucking pictures of this. And some rushed to help. Some people tried to open the doors and help the victims while other people took pictures of it happening.
What the
Oh my
fuck?
god, this shit is so crazy.
Right?
Yeah. So the police arrived on the scene 10 minutes after the crash at 12:33 a.m. When they arrived, there were only 2 police officers. And the paparazzi who were on the scene were like going insane. There was a documentary with a reenactment of basically how crazy it was. It was 2 police officers who were trying to push people back while the ambulance was coming, but they couldn't because the paparazzi would there were so many of them. They were just getting their shots, right?
God.
Princess Diana, and they only said 2 cops?
Right.
Oh, that's
they were the
sketchy.
first two who arrived there. More police came after. I'm going to get into it. I'm just going to explain the accident, what happened, and then I'm going to go back in detail with things that weren't exactly released to the public, but were later found to be true. So an ambulance was on site 5 minutes after that, so 15 minutes after the car accident happened, along with investigators from an elite crime squad who also arrived on the scene. Now, side note, the elite crime squad, they never handled road accidents. This was actually one of the first times they handled a road accident. They usually handled things like serial killers, terrorist attacks, and murders. However, someone had called them in, so they were actually kind of confused when they got there. They were like, they didn't know it was Princess Diana, but they were like, why the fuck are we here? So just before 1 o'clock a.m., approximately 27 minutes after the crash, that's kind of where we're at. So Fayed and Paul, who were on the left side of the car, the driver, and then Dodi El Fayed, who was sitting next to Diana in the backseat, they were pronounced dead at the scene. Trevor Reese-Jones was still conscious, but had suffered multiple serious facial injuries and head contusions. The front occupants' airbags functioned normally, so the airbags went off, but weren't too much of a help. And Diana, who had been sitting in the right rear passenger seat, was still conscious. She was removed from the car again around 1 o'clock and was driven by ambulance to a hospital, which was 3 miles away, that arrived at 2:06 a.m.
What?
Wait,
Wait.
that time jump. What in the
So,
world?
over an hour after she had been removed from the car and put into the ambulance was when she arrived at the hospital that was 3 miles away. So 5 photographers were taken into custody. I'll go back to it. 5 photographers were taken into custody. Later, 2 other photographers were detained and all of their rolls of film were taken and all of their cameras were taken and all of their vehicles were taken and impounded. So despite attempts to save her, Diana's internal injuries were too extensive and she died at 4 o'clock a.m. 13 hours later, around 5 p.m., Diana's former husband, Prince Charles, and Diana's 2 older sisters, Sarah and Jane, arrived in Paris. Prince Charles accompanied Diana's body home on Sunday. So the people of London and the people around the world were like broken. I get a little emotional there. Sorry about that. Like, people were fucking upset. I remember, do you guys remember this happening?
My mom would talk about how upset she was.
I didn't understand what was going on. I remember my mom said, I just remember she said it was in a tunnel, photographers caused it, and that Princess Diana was dead. And this was the first time I ever heard of Princess Diana. I was like, wait, princesses, that's like a real thing? No, for real, because I didn't really know anything about real princesses, and I was just really confused. And then I remember my dad got me the Beanie Baby, the purple Beanie Baby. Remember the Princess Diana bear? So I just remember my mom wasn't like crying and mourning, but she was just like, I remember my mom saying that she really liked her. I remember seeing it kind of on the news and just being confused about it. But like, these people were mourning like they were her best friend because she was the people princess, you know? But the way that the queen handled herself kind of made people question some things, because the queen, Prince Charles, and the 2 kids who were young at this time, I think like they were 11 and 15, Prince Harry and Prince William, they attended church right after Diana died, but it wasn't her church service. It was just a church service. Yeah. And they requested nothing was said about Princess Diana. Also, all of the televisions were taken out or like turned away, and all the radios were shut off within Buckingham Palace or like whatever palace they were staying in, whatever estate they were in, to the point where Harry and William were told that their mother died, but they didn't believe it because they were told and then they weren't really mourning. Yeah. They didn't hear about it, and they just kind of were carrying on with their lives like they normally would when they were in their dad's custody. So they were like, wait, is she really dead? Like, what's going on? Why is everybody acting so normal? Yeah. So then the people of London, I didn't know this, but the people of London actually got pissed at the queen, and there were like headlines that were like, Queen, your people need you. Where are you? Like, why aren't you saying anything about Princess Diana and her death? And then the Queen stepped in front of a microphone and publicly addressed the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. It was the first live televised appearance she made in over 50 years. A lot of people say a lot of stuff about what she said. I was going to play it, but I'm not going to play it. It's a little too long, but I will leave a link to it. It's kind of robotic, but again, it's the queen. She's the way that she is. Mm-hmm. She's kind of cold. She's a robot. She's a reptilian. She didn't necessarily have 100% love for Diana. It's suspicious to me, but again, I can't really critique how somebody else mourns a situation that happened to them. So I can't really say anything. But a lot of people were like, oh, she was so genuine, or a lot of other people were just like, oh, she's not. But my thing was the people of London were very, very vulnerable, and they were kind of like puppets at this time. So whatever you told them, they kind of went with.
Yeah.
Which again, when higher ups tell you things, it's kind of when you're a
What you
kid and
think
your
like
mom
that
tells
is.
you Santa exists.
You think Santa
Yeah,
exists.
your mom wouldn't lie to you, right? So keep that in mind with all of this stuff that's going on. So they went from being pissed at the Queen to her saying something for 2-3 minutes, and everybody was like, oh, we love the Queen, we are so sorry you're going through.
What
So
is
like,
wrong with people?
well, the people were also like really, really upset. Like people were fragile at this time. Like people
Right,
were
let me stop.
crying.
And looking for
no,
answers.
yeah, I understand though. And they officially were pretty much blaming the paparazzi. So when paparazzi were taking pictures of people leaving flowers, then people were like, what the
are
fuck
you
is wrong
doing?
with you?
Yeah.
It's your
Fault.
co-workers and
Yeah.
your industry that killed the princess, and now you're taking more pictures of us to publish and then make money off of. What the fuck is wrong with you?
Right.
Because that's what they were told, was that the photographers were the reason for it. Keep
But
that
it was
in mind.
really...
While everyone was grieving about the loss of an amazing woman, the public blamed the paparazzi, like I said, for the cause of the accident. But then it was determined by the police and the government that Henri Paul, the driver, was intoxicated. And the paparazzi who were initially jailed and charged with manslaughter were actually released from prison, but they still kept all of the photographs that were taken within the tunnel that day. There was no original inquest in Paris at the time of this. There was no real in-depth investigation surrounding the death of one of, if not the most famous woman in the world, especially at the time. She was the most famous woman in the world. So eventually, a French inquiry began in 1999, and this inquiry gathered 27 volumes of evidence, and they're like this big. It's like a dictionary-sized volume, 27 of those, of evidence that happened in this case. But it wasn't released until 2006. So in this information in the 27 volumes, it's very fucking interesting to say the least. So I will start by saying that the law surrounding the inquiry in Paris differs greatly from how it works in London. And also kind of how it works in London is kind of how it works in the US. So it's different than what we would be used to. So you're probably gonna be like, why the fuck did they do that? But some of the stuff they were doing was kind of just how they run it there. So the dude who was running this inquiry, he was a middle class, not really highly experienced lawyer who was put in charge of this. Now he was experienced, he just wasn't highly experienced. But what was
They were
going
all paid out.
what was going on was nobody wanted to take the case on because they were like,
They didn't want to find some shit that they had to exploit.
ladder for the ones in the back.
Okay.
So this inquiry started many conspiracy theories. So then there was a fucking inquiry on the inquiry. And this one was started in 2004 and it was called Operation Paget. And it was a police inquiry that, I know there's a lot going on, but it'll make sense. Basically, Operation Paget was trying to take the conspiracy theories and prove them wrong and shut it down. Before we totally dive into all this shit that was in these 27 volumes, you have to think, why would anybody want to murder Princess Diana? She clearly stirred the pot when she was in the kingdom, and she had her title as Her Royal Highness. The public liked her, but she was not really liked by every royal family member, and the government, they were kind of like, does she want to wear a bikini when she's pregnant? Does she want to openly talk about cheating? Like, does she want to
Also,
self-harm and
he
shake
cheated
hands?
on her.
Right, but
Also,
she talked
bitches
about
were
it.
jealous.
Well, don't cheat on me then. It was publicly announced that you were talking about fucking fishing tampons out of your girlfriend's pussy. It's not my fault.
Tampon Gate, you looked it up, didn't
Yes,
you?
I did.
Y'all, it is really something else. Again, she was somebody that the royal bloodline had never seen before. And there were rumors that Dodi Al-Fayed had planned to propose to Princess Diana that night in Paris. And that's why they made that stop in Paris.
What is Dodi's title?
He is basically just a socialite. He is his father ran a bunch of stores and had
I
hotels.
think you said that.
So he's kind of similar to what, oh God, I hate to make this comparison, but it's kind of like the Paris Hilton
I was
of
gonna
that
say
time.
Paris Hilton,
yeah,
yeah.
where he's like an heir to
Okay.
this. So he's well known and but he carries himself well and he's not a DJ. Love you,
And he's
Paris.
and he's not a fucked up guy.
Right. So his father, Dodi Al-Fayed's father, Muhammad, also backed up this claim saying that, yes, he was going to propose to her. Another rumor
Same age.
was that
She was pregnant.
she was pregnant with Al-Fayed's baby. A few people stepped forward to say that this claim was true, but it was never actually medically proven. And like I am saying a million times, we will get back to that. Stick a pin in it. So if this is true, if she was pregnant, So I'm just talking about the reasons why they would want to kill her. If she was pregnant, the very, very, very Catholic royal bloodline would then share ties with a Muslim.
I was like, anti-blackness.
Anti-brown.
Well, it's not, that could be part of it, but it's not as much racist as the religion because they were so Catholic. And to have that long ass
like
line
any
of
type of
they would share a bloodline. So that means Harry and William would then be stepbrothers to an Egyptian Muslim, which people were just like, oh, they probably wouldn't favor that, would they?
They were like that girl who has equations.
Right. Yes, that meme of that. Yeah.
That would mean that.
Let's talk about things that weren't totally released to the public until this inquiry happened, and then they were fully released in 2004. Shall we? Let's rewind 4 years before her death. During the 2004 inquiry,
Talk about the letter.
Diana's butler handed over a note she had wrote to him. So, do you know about this note?
No,
Okay. Well,
I know about it, and it's juicy.
in October 1993, just 10 months after she and Charles had separated, but they didn't officially divorce yet, Diana wrote to her butler, Paul Burrell. So in this, not to be confused with Henri Paul, the driver, so I'm just going to call him Burrell. In this note, Diana predicted her own death. Quote, I am sitting here at my desk today in October, longing for someone to hug me and encourage me to be strong and hold my head high. This particular phase in my life is most dangerous. My husband is planning an accident in my car, brake failure, and serious head injury in order to make a path clear for him to marry Tiggy. Camilla is nothing but a decoy, so we are all being used by the man in every sense of the word. End quote. So many people said that the butler, Burrell, he could copy Diana's handwriting. Other people were like, no, he couldn't. That's fucking weird. Why would he want to do that?
That's like not... No.
So then they were just like, okay, well, let's see if this is real. They bring in forensic handwriting specialists who could not confirm nor deny that this was really Diana's handwriting. So they were kind of just like, ooh, we did our tests and we don't really want to talk about it. Inconclusive, I guess. So that's when people were like,
do your job.
This is
well,
sketchy.
the thing was they did their job, but they
wouldn't release
a lot
the
of people
answer.
were like, it either really is inconclusive,
And they can't say that...
which would mean that the handwriting would be so close that it's very possible it could be Diana's handwriting, or that it was proven to be Diana's handwriting and they didn't want to say that because then right
Diana probably overheard him in an office.
So Burrell, the butler, then was just like, Diana was paranoid. After their divorce, she was checking under cars, she was checking under carpets because she thought she was being bugged. And then at first I was thinking like, whoa, that's crazy, but it's not that crazy because remember in 1992 and 1993 the recorded phone calls were leaked. They were being recorded.
Yeah.
This note was brought to the attention of the inquiry, and the butler Burrell was essentially excommunicated. So let's talk about the crash. According to a 2006 Press Association article, in a twist of irony, so the car just hit the pole. We're bringing it back to that. An off-duty ambulance doctor, Frederick Maez, was the first medic on the crash scene in the tunnel, though he may not have been the first witness. Dr. Maez had been traveling in the opposite direction through the tunnel when he came across the accident. He pulled over, checked the victims inside, realized the two men, who was Dodi Al-Fayed and the driver Henri Paul, noticed that they were dead and called emergency services before treating the woman who he did not realize at the time was Princess Diana. So Dr. Maez later told the French inquiry that, quote, the young woman was unconscious and groaning, end quote. So with the use of his personal oxygen mask, he tried to help Diana's breathing when the ambulance arrived. Dr. Maez was basically told to get off the scene. Now my question is, why would he have a personal oxygen? It's like, it's one of those, you know that you see them on the show where they put the oxygen mask over your face and it's like the plastic, so they squeeze it. He had one of those in his car. Now he was an off-duty doctor, but I'm just like, did you have it?
With that? Like,
right?
what?
Question mark. Anyway.
It was really in the tank.
Right. So then there was a police officer who spoke French and not English, and he said that blood was coming out of her mouth, out of her nose. You could see a huge wound on her forehead. She was moving. Her eyes were open, and she was speaking to me in a foreign language, which was English. And she said, "My God," after seeing her boyfriend dead next to her. So Diana was in a quote-unquote medically abnormal position in the back of the car. Essentially, she was tossed up and kind of hunched over the front seat of her car. And the car, if you see pictures of it, it is lay fucked up. Have you seen pictures of it?
No.
I have one right here. Don't even bother looking it up.
Oh my God. Oh my
shit.
God.
So go either look it up or follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and stuff, because I posted pictures of that if you would like to see what the car looks like. It is
Yikes.
fricked up. So essentially she was kind of tossed and hunched up towards the front seat where Trevor was sitting in front of her. And the roof of the Mercedes had to be cut away by firefighters before she could be taken out. So a cervical collar was fitted, and she was covered in a metallic isothermal blanket. Her pulse was originally recorded as, quote, fine and quite strong.
I was like, if she's responsive, she is
Yeah.
doing all right.
Okay.
So other emergency services tended to Trevor Reese Jones, who was also still alive. Fayed and Henri Paul were taken to the mortuary, not the hospital. So let's talk about the ambulance, shall we? So Dr. Jean-Marc Martineau was a specialist in anesthetics and an extensive care treatment. He was in charge of the ambulance when it arrived on the scene and described in full extent of Diana's injury to the French inquiry. He noted right side chest trauma and an apparent fracture to her upper right arm and wrist. There was a wound on her right thigh and an injury to her face.
Those don't match.
Well,
What
basically,
you just said and how she was in the car.
well, it could match potentially. I'm not a doctor, but potentially
How?
they were just like, she had a broken arm, a broken wrist, and some injuries.
Right.
Didn't she die of
she
head
was
injury?
not.
As soon as Dr. Martineau and the rest of the ambulance crew removed her, she went into cardiac arrest, but they managed to restart her heart. When the princess's blood pressure began to fall, Dr. Martineau realized that she most likely had internal bleeding. So they didn't take her to the hospital until an hour and almost a half after they had arrived on the scene. At the hospital, it was, like I said before, less than 3 miles away from the scene of the accident. They took over an hour to get there. So not only that...
Like, they were gone from the scene. Where did y'all go? No paparazzi followed
Also,
them?
let's talk
at
about that
point?
fucking timeline from the hospital to like.
Oh, I'm getting there. So not only that, but they also passed another medical center on their way to the hospital.
See, I knew it.
That was, when they looked into it, that hospital was equipped to handle her treatment. But this is where people are like, this is so different. This is what I was talking about, how they do things different there. It's important to note that French emergency services respond very differently to incidents involving casualties as we do. So this is a quote, "The French focus more on delivering medical treatment at the scene and moving the patient to the hospital once stabilization is achieved," end quote. So that's kind of how they actually run things over there.
She was stable before she left.
So my question is, okay, let's
Done
say
something.
let's say it's an excuse for the reason why you took so fucking long, because you were staying at the scene in the back of the car without driving it because you were trying to stabilize her there. Let's say that that's excused. Why wouldn't you stop at the hospital you passed?
Right. Like, y'all have been working this field for how long? You should have known all the hospitals in the area.
Right? Also, this is Princess Diana, and they already know it's
That's
Princess
what I'm
Diana
saying. Why
at
are
this.
you treated... What?
Also, they also literally drove past her.
Right.
place.
Okay, not only that, but why it also took them so long is that as the ambulance was traveling along, it stopped with an eye shot of the hospital when Diana's blood pressure dropped, as Dr. Martineau feared she would suffer another heart attack. Great fucking logic. What they would do is they would stop the fucking ambulance and head to the back, and everybody would all hands in, try to help her out when they were within eye shots of the fucking hospital. Sounds great. That's a great idea. So medical experts who reviewed the treatment for the French investigation concluded that the treatment was given in coordinates with the current medical knowledge in the light of the operating conditions and the injuries extensive. Basically, somebody spit out like, yeah, they didn't do anything wrong. They took an hour to get to the hospital. Sure, she crashed at 12:23 and she didn't get to the hospital till 2:06 a.m., 3 miles away. But they didn't do anything
That's
wrong.
literally like not even a 20-minute drive.
Excuse me, bitch.
I'm saying.
They could have a 20-minute drive, 3 miles away. They could have literally got there in like less than 4
At
minutes.
an ambulance.
If you're
speed,
driving
right.
60 miles per hour, do the math. 60 miles per hour, 1 mile per minute. You have your little flashers on. You could get there in like no fucking time.
Right.
They probably decided to fucking stop at a goddamn drive-through. They're like, anybody want anything? Biggie
Anybody want
size?
Right.
McDonald's?
Diana.
Diana, you hungry? Like the fuck? So the UK report, they said that after hearing heavy evidence from a number of medical staff who treated Diana, that there was no evidence to show that there were any appropriate, there wasn't a more appropriate hospital that could have given them this treatment, even though later they were like, oh shit, that hospital probably could have helped her out. However, the inquiry did dodge if this delayed her death. So if they would have got there faster, would she have lived? They were just like, ooh, sorry, gonna step back from that. And
right, I don't know.
I gotta go vacuum my room. So a lot of people were like, it took them so long because her injuries weren't as bad as anticipated. And whatever happened in the back of that ambulance caused her to die.
Yeah.
And we'll get back to that in a second. So let's talk about the hospital.
Like, how was she responsive? Only had like one broken limb and a head
and
injury,
all of
and
a
now
sudden-
she's dead.
Right.
And we'll talk about what actually killed her.
And
So
wasn't she supposed to be in the side that her husband was on?
I didn't read that, but that could make more sense. That would make more sense, wouldn't it? So it was immediately stated, like I said before, Dodi Al-Fayed and Henri Paul and Princess Diana sustained their injuries. Oh, I didn't say this part. All three of them sustained their injuries while not wearing seatbelts. So this also raised questions because any photograph of Princess Diana, she's wearing a seatbelt. She like advocated for wearing a fucking seatbelt. If you
So,
Google her
she
in a
has
car,
kids.
she has a fucking seatbelt on.
What the fuck happened?
Right. So an x-ray confirms that she had internal bleeding, but 10 minutes after she had been admitted, she suffered, again, cardiac arrest. She underwent emergency surgery where they noted that the source of bleeding was very, very rare. It came from a minuscule tear in the upper left pulmonary vein, which is essentially the vessel that carries blood from your lungs to your heart. They repaired it, but the heart had stopped by the time they repaired it. So the medical staff attempted to restart her heart, but the injuries were too severe and she was pronounced dead. Then, Diana's body was immediately embalmed while her body was still warm.
What?
If you are embalmed, a full forensic test cannot be done. So any chance of anyone else reinvestigating her true cause of death,
Because I was going to say, don't they wait to do that so the investigation can continue?
they couldn't do that because her body was embalmed while she was literally still warm. So if anybody tampered with the body, it is technically impossible for us to know at this point. But the French inquiry stated the embalming of the Princess of Wales was carried out in accordance with French procedures, end quote. But it technically was illegal upon my research. But what do I know? I'm just a gay boy with a attitude problem.
I'm just a kid and life is a nightmare.
Let's talk about...
Does any of that, though, have to get, like, approved by, like, the person who's in the accident's family first before you go ahead with doing those things?
I don't know. You would think. I don't know.
Like
though.
the queen said, hit her with the embalming.
Right? Give her the juice.
Embalm that bitch.
So,
She said no files on here.
would we be surprised if she did?
No.
So let's talk about driver Henri Paul and his post-mortem
Henri.
report. So there was this rumor, but no solid evidence, that Henri Paul was working for the MI6 since the late 1980s. So that's kind of like their CIA or FBI or something. So a lot of people think that he could have been in on this. Other people think he wasn't, but I'm just telling you that there was rumors of that. It was stated that the driver, Henri Paul, had died instantly on impact when his neck snapped. So originally, at the time of the crash, the blame was officially placed on the paparazzi. Then 30 hours later, the police changed their story and blamed Henri Paul, stating that his blood alcohol content was 3 times that of the legal limit. However, there is security footage from the lobby of the Hotel Ritz of Henri less than an hour before the crash. You can watch it. I watched it on fucking YouTube. He was not drinking, and at one point, he squatted down to tie his shoes. He shifted from his left shoe to his right shoe perfectly fine without wobbling, and then he stood up and like fixed his suit and then walked off like perfect, stone cold fucking sober.
Wouldn't they be able to tell, though? Like, I feel like either one of the people in the car would have been like, you seem pretty fucked up. Are you sure you want to drive this car?
Right. And it was actually stamped on the footage that it was 30 minutes before the crash. So this was 30. He would have been fucked up if he was 3 times the legal limit.
Yeah.
He would have been fucked up by this point. Also, the public statement that the police had made that Henri Paul's blood alcohol content was 3 times the legal limit had been released before Henri Paul's blood had actually been fully analyzed.
Oh, Oh shit.
So then there's like
y'all
no
breathalyzing a dead body?
Right,
How y'all do that?
There's no fucking report that's out. The police are like, oh, he was 3 times over the legal limit. Okay.
People said, who said?
But then we get the analysis report. And this is when people are like, wait, question mark, because his blood analysis said he was 3 times over the legal limit of alcohol, but it said he also had 20.7% carbon monoxide in his system. At that amount, you can't drive. You would probably be vomiting. You would be passed the fuck out. It was also said he was on a fuck ton of antidepressants. A few in particular he was not prescribed to. And the meds he was prescribed to were not found in his system. So I'm going to also mention that there were 22 other bodies in the morgue that night. That's 22 other potential blood samples that you can just do the old Mary Kate and Ashley switcheroo with.
Shit.
The blood that's filed as Henri Paul's real blood sounds more like the blood of a suicide victim who died of carbon monoxide poisoning from running a car with a closed garage.
Right.
Somebody who would have drank 3 times. Yeah. Okay. So this theory can also be supported by the facts that there were antidepressant meds in his system that he was not prescribed to, and the ones he was prescribed to were not in his system. So that would match perfectly with another person who was on antidepressants who may or may not have, unfortunately, committed suicide.
Parent trap that bitch.
So Dodi Al-Fayed's family at this point was like, red flags everywhere. I can barely see. There are so many damn red flags. So Mohammed Al-Fayed, who was Dodi's father, had asked for an independent post-mortem exam of of the driver, Henri Paul, but was denied without reason. He was like, okay, well then,
He's like so rich. How denial where?
Right.
right? Can
Denial for an error?
Right. So he was like, okay, so we don't need to do our own exam, but can we take your samples and then run an analysis on the samples that you already took? And they were like, no, we're going to deny it without reason. So now Mohammed said that Trevor Reese-Jones, who again was the Fayed's trusted family security, he would not have gotten in the car or allowed Diana or Fayed into the car. Basically what you were saying, there were 3 other people who would have been like, you're fucked up. Clearly, I'm not getting in the car with you if you were drinking. And then Paul's family was like, yo, this ain't fucking right, because Henri Paul's name was being dragged through the media. There was pictures of him everywhere. He's dead. Right. He can't defend himself. And everybody's like, he's the reason your princess is dead. You're in mourning. This whole country is in mourning. This world is in mourning because the most famous woman in the world is dead because of this man who was drinking and driving. And it's proven because here is his alcohol level 3 times the amount. Can you believe it?
Muhammad was like, that's a lie.
Right. So then Paul's family and Fayed's family got 4, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4 of Europe's top pathologists to examine the driver Henri Paul's post-mortem reports. They were like, fine, you're not going to let us run our own thing.
We'll do it.
We have the information that you have, and we're going to take a little sneaky peek at what the fuck you did. It's like somebody who knows what the fuck to do with a dead body in a post-mortem exam. My grandfather was a pathologist.
Oh my god, no way.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So,
look at you now.
I know. Grampy would be so proud. So again, they got 4 of these, 4 different people, and they listed 28 critical errors that made this report unreliable.
Unreliable.
Some of these errors included, I'm not going to go through all of them, but some of them included the fact that the autopsy was not timed, which is a huge no-no, that there was no proper description given of how the body was identified, which is a big no-no. There was no explanation for the 20.7 carbon monoxide in his blood. And one of the pathologists stated, quote, the hypothesis that there was a mix-up in the samples needs to be seriously considered, end quote.
He's giving away now.
Literally.
Okay.
Literally. However, the French inquiry did not include any of this, and Henri Paul's intoxication remains the official cause of the car accident to this very day. Shall we talk about the lone survivor? Did you know somebody survived this?
Yeah, it was the guy sitting in the passenger seat.
Correct. After the accident, Trevor Reese-Jones was alive but trapped inside of the car. He suffered severe facial injuries. He was the only passenger to have been wearing a seatbelt. He was in a coma for almost 2 weeks after the crash. He suffered amnesia for many months after that. Anytime Trevor spoke about the crash, he spoke through a representative. In the mid-2000s,
You're a fraud.
One of his representatives told police that Trevor had a, quote, very limited recall, end quote, of what happened immediately before the crash.
Sure.
And this was unlikely to ever change. His psychiatrist said, quote, Trevor Reese-Jones remembers getting into the Mercedes in the Rue Cambon and the car driving off. He remembers nothing after that. A few snatches might come back to him, but his memories are not at all reliable because even for him, it is impossible to tell if these are genuine memories or reconstructed of the events from information he might have later dreamed or imagined. So kind of, even if Trevor Reese-Jones wanted to talk, he kind of has people with their hands over his mouth like this.
It's
we
not
need
true.
to-
It's his
It's not true.
imagination. What was his relationship to
He
them again?
was the Al Fayed's, the family security guard.
Oh, okay.
So he was like one of their top head security guards. So the conclusion that Trevor had suffered memory loss was challenged by Mohammed Al Fayed, who said that Trevor knows exactly what the fuck happened in that tunnel that night.
Ooh.
Trevor was forced to resign from his job with the Al Fayed family in April of 1998 with the advice of his solicitors, who were urging him to keep his mouth shut. In 2000, Trevor published a memoir called The Bodyguard's Story, Diana, the Crash, and the Sole Survivor. So Muhammad read it, and he was like, this doesn't even sound like his tone of voice. This is a book of fucking lies. Muhammad was then like, the Secret Services had a ghostwriter write this to basically make people not think anything suspicious happened there. He's like, I'm calling fucking bullshit on this. They're trying to make it look like they died in a simple traffic accident.
So was no one else in the like they were the only car driving in the tunnel? That's why I'm like,
Yeah,
Thank you so much for asking. That's a good segue, but I'm going to get to that in one second. So, Operation Paget, which was the inquiry of inquiries, because they were trying to shut down all of these quote unquote lies and conspiracy theories, they basically said that Trevor wrote the book and nobody else could have done it, even though this happened 4 years after the book was written and there was no way of saying who wrote what.
meanwhile, y'all are saying he has brain damage.
Okay, I don't have, what am I going I don't know what to say
He doesn't
here.
remember anything.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, quite. So, after leaving the Al Fayed family, Trevor was immediately given a senior job for the United Nations security. So Muhammad is like, that's fucking weird. The government takes you pretty much get forced to quit your job with me, and the government gives you a high up job. Muhammad said that he basically was given this job to, quote, ensure his continued silence, end quote. And then the Operation Paget was like, nah, no, dismissed. That's not, no, not here.
Couldn't be.
So Trevor Reese-Jones hasn't really done any interviews. He's done a couple, but he's been pretty much silent and stayed out of the public eye since. So now that our victims are 6 feet under and our lone survivor can't recall a single thing that happened, let's return to the scene of the crash, the tunnel, motherfucker.
You always need someone close to you. That's how they get you.
Isn't this so suspicious? There was so much going on in this case that I had no idea about.
Yeah.
So the tunnel. This is almost unbelievable. So the tunnel, the route that Henri Paul was taking to the apartments, not very typical. Even if he was trying to detour the paparazzi, there was a quicker way to the apartments that he didn't have to actually drive through the quote unquote city. It was like kind of a city atmosphere where more people were likely to see them. Witnesses didn't see the moment of the crash because they were either at the entrance or the exit of the tunnel. However, there was this dude, his name is Clive Guru Voodoo, and he was a driver and he was parked on top of the tunnel because there's a street above the tunnel. He was above it and he was waiting for his clients to finish dinner. He was smoking a cigarette and he heard the sound of what sounded like a car speeding, put into neutral, and then accelerating very fast, then a loud noise, then a car crash. And Clive stated he never saw paparazzi in or around the tunnel at the time of the crash, but he did shortly after the crash happened. However, he and others in the area did claim they also saw a bright white flash, brighter than any photographer's flash, just before the car accident. Let's fast forward really quick to 2008 when this MI6 agent Richard Tomlinson is on his deathbed, and he stated MI6 was monitoring Diana before her death and the driver on the night she died. Henri Paul may have been an MI6 informant, and the car crash resembled plans he saw during 1992 for the assassination of Yugoslav president using a bright flash of light to cause a traffic accident.
Look at that.
Interesting, right? And you would think that the tunnel would be treated as an investigation, like
You
a
would think
crime
that
scene,
other
right?
people would be in it.
Bitch, wrong. Even reporters were shocked that the scene of the crash had not been preserved. They had expected it to be closed for several days. Instead, Paris street cleaners sprayed bleach and detergent in the tunnels There's footage of them doing this. It is not just like I heard people talking about this. There is footage of a big ass green truck that has, it kind of looks like a rake with like prongs in it that sprays the ceiling, sprays the walls, sprays the floor of the tunnel with not just water, detergent and bleach. Right after the crash. And then they reopened it and cars were driving at the scene of the crash 4 hours after it happened.
Oh no.
So if there was any evidence of any weird shit going
nothing
on.
happened here.
Weird, right? That's one of the biggest red flags to me.
Yeah.
Why didn't no one like
an immediate cleanup and it's Princess Diana?
Why would that be an appropriate time to do that?
Also, why
ever?
This shit is sketchy.
Also, there was a camera in the tunnel. There's 2 cameras. There are speeding cameras at the front, the entrance and the exit of the tunnel.
I'm gonna fall out of this chair.
When you, it's kind of how it works now. Like you speed, it takes a picture of your license plate. Your license plate is run through. You get a ticket in the mail. Well, they just so happened to not be working that night. Or were they? Because a person who drove through the tunnel 20 minutes before Princess Diana's car crash got a ticket in the mail.
I would have been like, I rebuke. Princess Diana didn't get a ticket.
And Princess... No! The cameras were then removed after. Shall we talk about the car? I watched a 2017 documentary called The Death of Diana, The Search for the Truth, and it's basically about the car itself, like nothing really else, but about the car. I didn't know much about this car. Fucking weird. So the black Mercedes S280 that the 4 were driving in at the time of the crash, the car had been rented and had a sketchy history before Princess Diana ever got in the back seat. It was originally purchased in 1994 by a young advertising executive. 3 months later, the owner had his driver stay in the car while he went inside and he bought a pair of shoes. While he was buying the pair of shoes, a random man came to the side of the car, grabbed the driver, forced him onto the ground. The man got into the car and fucking sped the fuck off.
What?
It ended up being a man who was a convict who was out on day release. Not the kind of way you stay on low profile, but that's just me.
You know?
So the man who stole the car, and then he was driving out in an open countryside in Paris, going extremely fast. He then started to skid off the road, and the car rolled several times before coming to a stop. The convict fled, but was later identified. So this car that she got into was already in an accident 3 months after it was purchased new. So when they found the car, it was flipped upside down, and the 3-month-old Mercedes-Benz was now a write-off. Luckily, the man got his insurance money. Essentially, they were like, it would cost so much more money. It's like totaled. You can't fix it. It's totaled, but he had his insurance money. So he's like, okay, didn't think anything of it. Then there's a gap in the car's history for the next 2 years. So it's hard for investigators to research the history of the car since nothing was computerized at this time. The original dealership had changed and it's now a gym, and the paperwork for the car, or where like the paperwork for the actual car itself, remained a mystery. Then in 1996, that's when it like pops up again. They're like, oh, there's this car, we can trace it. 1996, the car was repaired and purchased for 40,000 euros by a limousine rental company called Atois Limousine. And they had been told it was previously owned. It was a company car, and the manager from Mercedes had been driving it for the past 6 months to make sure it was okay to rent out to a limousine fucking rental company. So he was like, okay, cool, sounds good. So the car owner, now the limousine car owner, they parked the car in the heart of Paris when a stranger again approached the fucking car. He stuck something on the owner's neck, and the actual owner himself talks about it in the documentary. They pulled him out of the car, pinned him against the wall. Then whoever this mystery man is gets into the car and drives off. Then the car goes missing. 2 months later, it's found on the side of the highway. The exterior was undamaged, but when police investigated, all of the electronics inside, including a computer chip, had been removed. Like windshield wipers, like electronic windows, everything electronic and digital was missing. So the car was repaired and then placed in the Ritz Paris basement parking garage. Now, who exactly repaired the car or what details were behind how it actually got there, they couldn't really find. They were like, it got here, somebody made that choice. Who the fuck made that choice? How the fuck was it repaired? Let's talk. And they were like, I don't know. So people think the car was cursed. Okay, possibly. Other people think that the MI6 had taken control of the car remotely at the time of Diana's car crash because the computer chip and all the electronics had been replaced and nobody knows who replaced them or how good of a job they did.
Yeah.
Okay. So Then Mercedes-Benz, the company, refused to inspect the car after the accident. So a lot of people were like, Mercedes-Benz knows that the car was probably fucked with, but they don't want to be like, yes, somebody fucked with this car. Yes, it was the government, because then they're going to not.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
They
So
could be the government too. Sorry.
they could have been paid off. Who knows?
And didn't you say that, so the person driving the car was Henri?
Henri Paul.
And wasn't he replacing someone else for the night? Like, he wasn't normally there.
He wasn't normally there. He wasn't replacing anything. The choice that they were making to go to the other apartment wasn't something that was on their agenda.
Oh, okay.
So he needed somebody, so he trusted the head of security. So again, people were just like, was he the MI6? But also, if he wasn't the MI6, would you want to crash in this car? Or other people were like, yes, he was in the MI6, so he knew he had to do this, but he didn't know that they were going to remotely crash the car into a fucking pillar. So then in 1999...
I'm sure he wanted to come out alive.
Right, as we all do, right? The shining stars we are. Then in 1999, the French inquiry concluded that the Mercedes-Benz had actually come in contact with another vehicle while in the tunnel. Weird, we haven't heard about this information yet, have we?
How?
Bizarre.
I was about to, that's what I'm saying. I'm like, the paparazzi didn't see another vehicle come out or was in there.
So,
Also, isn't this like a really like, it's like the tunnel is used a lot?
yeah. Well, also, it was really late at night and it wasn't hella frequent, but it was like pretty trafficked.
Right.
So, okay.
Also, it's petty. People are
Oh, I
out
thought
and
you said
about.
I thought you said it's petty. It's Petty Perry.
Petty patty.
So
People are out and about.
people, there's conflicting eyewitness reports of like people were like, I saw a motorcycle, I saw a photographer, and someone else was like, I actually saw somebody walk up to the car and give like an X, and they were like, job well done, and like went and like teleported away or something. So there's a shit. I can't cover everything, but essentially they couldn't really take on the eyewitness reports because everything was so conflicting. Someone said, actually in this documentary about the car, they found, oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so let's talk about the other car really quick. And if you didn't think it was weird enough, it gets fucking weirder. And if you think our body count is over, oh bitch, it's not. So the crime squad.
They run over.
Remember the crime squad? It's not who they. Ooh. So the crime squad, who had originally handled murders and stuff, they reported finding debris from another car that was in the tunnel. The debris was from the mystery car's back right taillight, mixed with some debris from the Mercedes exterior passenger side rear wing window. I know that sounds like a lot, but it's basically there was a car in front of them that potentially hit them. There's also white paint marks that were on the side of the black Mercedes. So it was suggested again that the mystery car was in front and somehow caused the accident. They think the mystery car had driven fast around the car and either pushed them into the pillars or they had created a very dangerous situation on purpose, which led to the crash. So now they have the white paint that's on the Mercedes, right?
And they just fled the scene.
Because the crash doesn't really make sense. Like, especially if someone is coherent, like, you don't lose that much control.
And they were going.
Where's the pillar versus like is?
I have a diagram that I'm going to post on Instagram. Do you want? It probably would have helped you out in the beginning. Do you want me to show it to you?
Yeah,
Okay.
because I need to see this shit.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, to bounce off and then
Yeah,
right
like,
into
that's
that, like someone has
unrealistic.
to.
Right. It kind of looks like their path was either someone was in front of them or they like had to quickly zhuzh out of the way. Also, it was I think 35 or 40 miles per hour, and they were going 65.
It literally looks like someone like.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's down, so people couldn't see.
Oh.
Like anybody in the public, like this is kind of
but I don't.
perfect.
That looks sketchy to me. How do you do?
That's
like,
what they're saying. Well, now they're finding out there was another car in there, and they're thinking this is what happened
That would
because
make
of
sense.
the paint that is on the side of it. But yet this guy was drunk and blamed for the accident. Wouldn't you think if this caused the accident, and it was confirmed that there was another car, that they would try to go after the person in the car?
Right.
Also, wouldn't they like instead of being really suspect and be like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, no one saw it," or "This guy was drunk, but we took his blood test before," like all of that? Don't you think they would have tried to pin it on the car in the fucking tunnel? But since it was suspect and they can't prove that it was an accident because I know it looks
That's a
sus. Now they're like, oh, yep, we don't
there
know
was
what
another.
happened.
That's a good point. I don't know. I don't know why the fuck they didn't go after this guy so hard, because it ended up being like Mohammed Al Fayed and his family who pushed a lot of private investigators and the actual investigation. So that's what I'm going to talk about right now because
Because it wasn't private to the royal family.
Right.
They knew.
The car
Right.
was
So the paint actually has like a certain chemical compound in it, or like a chemical makeup that is like DNA, essentially. It's like paint DNA. So they found out that the paint came from a white Fiat Uno. And okay, so essentially Muhammad's family private investigator found a white Fiat Uno, and the taillight had been recently fixed on it, and it belonged to a paparazzi. His name was James Anderson. He was also a man who had political connections at the highest level. He was actually a hired photographer / paparazzi on the side, so he was kind of trusted by the French prime minister. He also was on the yacht that summer Princess Diana and Dodi were photographed. They believe it was possible that this James dude may have worked for the MI6. According to one of James Anderson's friends, he had been bragging about the fact that he was in the tunnel the night of the accident. His wife later confirms with investigators that James claimed to have taken the last photograph of Diana in the car before her death. In June of 2000, James Anderson's white Fiat Uno was found in the middle of the woods.
Oh.
It was on fire, and there was a body inside.
Why is no one talking about this?
Yikes! What the fuck?
The body belonged to James Anderson himself. He was sitting at the steering wheel and he had a 2-inch hole in his head. But the pathologist who worked on the case said that hole was created due to the intense heat of the fire after it set itself ablaze.
Oh my god, that's crazy.
However, high levels of carbon monoxide in the same report that were found in his blood suggested that James was alive in the car when it was set on fire, enough to be engulfed in flames rather than being killed beforehand.
Right.
His death was ruled a suicide.
No.
This is something real that happened. How fucking...
This is a lot.
Question mark. Why are more people not talking about this? Why are more people not talking about this?
Last photo.
This,
Dang it.
though this is public record, it was never mentioned by the French inquiry. So the official report of the driver of the Fiat is concluded in the official report that they never found the driver, and they never found the real car. They were like, we don't know who it was. We don't know where the car is.
Okay.
That's just in the official report. They were like, let's shut it down, close that
That's what they love
book.
to do.
So that's what I got on the death, questionably murder of Princess Diana. What do you think?
Crazy.
I'm gonna throw up.
I did not because hearing about it when I was a kid and hearing my mom talk about it, I would never thought it was that deep. It was just a car accident.
I knew
Right.
some stuff. Like I knew about the letter.
Right.
But there's like
the
a lot
letter
of,
is crazy,
Right.
especially
There's a lot of
because that's how it
Yeah.
basically happens.
It's fucking weird, and horrifying, and it's sad because Harry and William lost a mother too. Like that's
yeah.
fucked up.
Like we're
And
never
it's-
told about it.
and it's possible that their grandmother was behind it. I
I
didn't
wonder
say
if
that.
they've looked into it,
Right.
as they got older. I wonder
Yeah,
if
I don't know.
just like us.
Oh, I wonder what really happened
Listening
to
now.
Mom.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
Princess, tune in.
So
I did the research for you.
I know they really listen to this podcast quite a lot.
Podcast.
So some other theories. She faked her own death and she lives with Dodi in peace without the paparazzi.
Oh,
I mean,
Tupac and
anything's
everyone else.
anything's fucking
Oh, I would
possible
love
at this
that, but,
point.
went back
I
to
don't-
Africa.
I don't think so.
Other people think Dodi Al-Fayed was targeted, not Diana. They think maybe his business partners or his father's business partners, which could be true. Who knows? Because he was, I don't know.
No one wants
Also-
Paris Hilton dead.
Right. Well, she's an
Everyone forgot she was
heiress.
alive.
She's not dating a former prince who was
Right.
pregnant on the beach. And it is also stated that allegedly she was about to go campaign on behalf of Palestinians for her anti-landmine campaign. Don't really know if this is a reason why you would want her killed.
Yeah.
Not really sure. I don't know the details behind it. It could be a fact, or it could be a reason to want her
my
dead
thing
or
is,
something.
if they were going after Dodi, then why did they bother killing her off at the end? Maybe because she was a witness and she would have.
I feel like they went after both of them. They didn't want both of them to.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't fucking
They
know.
didn't want her to marry him, and they didn't want him to I feel like she would have told him some info, so they didn't want him to leak her shit. So they were like, everyone's got to go.
Everyone in the car.
Possibly. I mean, that car was fucked up.
Especially because of how coherent she was after the accident. I feel like she would have been like, I saw a white car,
Right.
a white flash,
Right.
and
That's
white
another
face.
thing. The fact that there was the flash, allegedly, that there was the flash, and then in 1992, there's files that are just like, this is how we're going to assassinate the prime minister.
Yeah.
And then
Or the president.
Her letter to her butler. So
Right.
It's the same
Right. However, we don't know, because just as much as this could have been coerced, the butler could have been coerced to make the story flip the other way.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate, but I wouldn't doubt that she wrote that letter to her butler.
Right. Yeah.
She was very outspoken. I
Yeah.
feel
And
like
she was good
would have
friends
only
with him.
done that, with someone she trusted.
If you watch the documentary on Netflix, Diana, in her own words, I think that's what it's called. She is a lot more open than I thought she was. She really airs it all out. She talks about how she felt on the day when she was doing a photo shoot of Prince William when he was born, and she was like, everybody was taking the baby out of my hands, and I was pushed to the side. They didn't want me. They wanted the royal blood in the picture. And she was saying all of these things. She was very like, I was like, ooh, I don't know if I would have said that, or maybe I'm not blaming her at all.
Yeah, no.
I'm just saying I was like, ooh, that's more ballsy than I thought she was.
Mm-hmm.
And good on her to do that. But if somebody higher up wants you assassinated. And another thing is interesting to think about is back in the day, you would say things like that and the queen would have you beheaded.
Right.
Why
you
would
can't
this
publicly do that anymore? See.
why would this not be the modern day way to do that?
Right.
In a car. Basically like beheading somebody you don't want there, as the queens before her had done, but in a way that looks legal.
Is more right,
And then
because you
more
can't publicly kill
accidental.
people anymore.
Right.
Well,
She
in
can.
some countries.
In this type of situation, like
Right.
it makes sense of like the way a queen would behead. So
Hush.
I don't know. I think it's very interesting to look into, and I have a new appreciation for her that I didn't know before. So thank you, Amy, for suggesting this.
Thanks, Aim.
Thank you.
And thank you, Kiko, for being here for this episode.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes.
And thank
learned
you
so
guys so much for listening. And if you want to hear Sarah's episode, which you fucking are, tune in next week because she's got a royal conspiracy that I cannot wait to hear, and I'm moister than an oyster for it, baby. So make sure you're following us on Instagram and all that fucking place, all those fucking places, all the social media places to look at the pictures. As always, our sources are cited. If you want to go do some investigating, some snooping yourself, I highly suggest it, but maybe open an incognito tab and delete that
yeah,
history.
You can do private on Google. Open a private tab.
But if they can kill Princess Diana in a tunnel
They're
somewhere,
watching you.
I'm sure they can figure out how to see you looking at
That.
suspicious things on the internet. Also, again, give us a rating, 5 stars. Thank you so much for listening.
Five.
And if you want bonus content, patreon.com/esoteric oddities. Some exciting things are going to be happening very soon.
I love that. I love that for you. Are you good?
No.
Bye.
Bye.